In John chapter 20, we have the account of Jesus' first resurrection appearance. We have the story here in the beginning of John chapter 20, verse 1 says, "Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, 'They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him.'" Verse 3, so Peter and the other disciples started for the tomb. I'm skipping down here. They go to the tomb and they look in the tomb and they realize that Jesus is not there. But skipping down to verse 10 says, "Then the disciples went back to their homes," verse 11, "but Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb." I want to pause here. We have that Mary comes to the tomb first, and having seen that the Lord is not there, the stone is rolled away, she rushes to the disciples and finds them in their place of residence and tells them they come back to the tomb. The record doesn't say that she comes back to the tomb, but we know she comes back to the tomb either with them or shortly after them, because verse 11 says that she stood outside the tomb. So she's come back to the tomb. And then, as verse 10 states, the disciples leave and go back to their home, and Mary stays at the tomb. The question that I find very interesting here that I never considered before, it's the first time I'm thinking about it, is where was Jesus in all of this? Where was Jesus in all of this? We know that sometimes before Mary appears here, which is still in the dark hours of the morning, sometime before this, Jesus resurrects from the dead. But then if we skip down in this same chapter here, and we go to verse 17, Jesus says to Mary, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet returned to the Father." So he's resurrected before she comes to the tomb, before all of this happens, but he hasn't gone to his Father yet. So he's not in heaven, he's not in the tomb. Where is Jesus? Now, I will say that I don't know for certain, because the Bible doesn't say for certain, but I believe a very reasonable, and I'd say even likely, possibility is that Jesus was still there in the garden. In chapter 19, verse 41, it says, "The place where Jesus was crucified, at that place there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb." So there's a garden here. And so I can imagine that maybe there are trees, maybe there are big bushes, and maybe Jesus is somewhere among these trees, somewhere among these bushes, watching what will happen, watching when Mary comes to the tomb and finds that he's not there, watching when she leaves and comes back with the disciples, Peter and John, and seeing Peter and John go into the tomb. Jesus, I imagine, is still watching. And then Peter and John leave the tomb, but Mary stays by. And all of this time, Jesus, watching, does not choose to reveal himself to them, not choose to show himself to them, because of course he would do that later, and they would see for the course of 40 days that he was alive, that he showed himself to them alive. But what is it that caused Jesus to decide to reveal himself to Mary? Continuing in the passage, we have the angels appear to Mary in verse 12, and they ask her in verse 13, "Woman, why are you crying?" The concern is, why are you crying? Not why are you here, not what's happened, but why are you crying? She says, "They have taken my Lord away, and I don't know where they have put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there. It's at this point that Jesus chooses to reveal himself. Verse 15, he says, "Woman, why are you crying?" Again, repeating the same word of the angels. I'm suggesting, and again, the Bible doesn't say it explicitly, but I believe it's in harmony with the character of Jesus, that the problem here, what caused him to, I suggest, change his plan, he didn't seem to have intended to reveal himself to any humans before going to his Father, because he said, "You can't touch me before I go to my Father." But what moved Jesus were these tears of Mary, the fact that she's crying. "Why are you crying?" the angels ask. "Why are you crying?" Jesus asks. And she says, thinking that he's the gardener, "If you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary," and said it in the voice that he had said to her many times, "Mary." And she, recognizing that voice, replies to him in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which is to say teacher. He quickly says, don't hold on to me, for I have not yet returned to my Father. This was not the plan, Mary. I was not intending to show myself to any humans. I have a work to do. I have a mission. I have an important goal. I need to get back to my Father and present myself before him before I come back and allow myself to be handled. As later in this passage, he tells the disciples, handle me and see that it is I. But before that, I need to go to my Father. But Jesus, I believe, like he was in Luke, it says he was moved with compassion. When he saw the widow who had one son and that son died, when he saw that that woman had lost her only son, this is Luke chapter 7, it says that he was moved with compassion when he saw her weeping, mourning for her son. And this is the same Jesus we see here, seeing Mary cry. He had seen Peter and John, and they, of course, conflicted in their minds. It was an emotional, not an emotional, but an intellectual response for them. What does this mean? What are the doctrinal implications of this reality? But for Mary, it was an emotional response. It was a personal response. For her, it wasn't a matter of, well, do the dead resurrect? It wasn't a matter of, what does this mean he's the Messiah or not? This means, where is my Lord that I love? Where is the one who has been so gracious to me, who has shown me so much love? Where is my Lord? Where is Jesus? And I believe that love, that crying, that heart that was broken, that is what moved Jesus to reveal himself and to seek to give her a revelation that will bring her comfort. Why not wait, Jesus? Why not wait till the afternoon when you reveal yourself to the rest of the disciples? Why not wait till next week when you reveal yourself to him? And over the course of the next weeks for the 40 days, why not wait? She could have cried just a few hours longer, but it was urgent for Jesus to bring her comfort. Comfort is a primary aspect of the character of Jesus. In John 14, verse 16, Jesus says that the Father will send you another comforter, talking about the Holy Spirit. He says another comforter, implying that he himself is a comforter. Jesus is a comforter, and the Father would send another comforter. This is a primary aspect of Jesus' character. Isaiah chapter 61, when talking about the Messiah, many of the verses there in the early part talk about the work of the Messiah, but we find here a very significant phrase in the end of verse 2. He would comfort all who mourn. He would comfort all who mourn. That's part of the work of Jesus, the work of the Messiah. Again, because he's moved with compassion when he sees the sorrow of his children. And his work is to comfort all that mourn. Jesus says in John that if you have seen me, you have seen the Father. The Bible calls Jesus the image of God, saying that the same character of Jesus is the character of God. And that's consistent with this teaching as well, that the God that Jesus represents is called in 2 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 3. The end of it says, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort. This is painting a picture different from what we sometimes think of God. God is not this far off, distant, impassible, unfeeling God on a throne that we can't talk to, that we can't communicate, that's not moved by our feelings, that's not concerned with the things that concern us. We feel we're crying sometimes. Many people cry in their beds. People cry alone in their homes. People cry in their car on the way to work, in a corner somewhere, crying because they feel no one cares. No one is feeling their pain. No one has compassion on them. But the Bible reveals that God, it says, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort. The Revelation paints the picture in the end of all things, saying that God's work will not just be to end sin, will not just be to destroy all the hurt and pain that death and sin has caused, but that he will wipe all tears from their eyes, the God of all comfort. And I believe right here in this Easter resurrection story, we find a revelation of that character of God. That moved with compassion, Jesus seeks to comfort Mary. It's an urgent issue for Jesus, that putting aside the work he had to do, the most important work in the universe, putting that off for just a little while longer, if he can bring comfort, if he can just for a few moments lessen the pain that's experienced by his daughter, by Mary. This message is primarily intended for a dear friend of mine who, like Mary, is mourning the death of one that is very close to her. This friend is mourning the senseless murder of her husband of 9 years, who was killed in an attempted robbery just outside of their home last Monday. Just like Mary, you're weeping. And I'm talking to you because you've shared with me how you and your dear children have curled up in bed and slept and cried, I'm sure, in the nights, cried in the morning, remembering this terrible tragedy. And as many of us are celebrating Easter today, you also are celebrating Easter, but also having to prepare for the funeral of your husband. It's a horrible time, a terrible tragedy. But what I want to say to you is what I believe this Easter story says to us. In addition to all the wonders of salvation that have been brought to us as a result of Jesus' sacrifice, in addition to all of the joys that we experience, also the Easter story says that Jesus is the God of all comfort. He's moved with compassion. He's there, just as he was there with Mary, watching her weep, watching her cry, but not watching without action. He's watching, move with compassion to comfort her, to comfort all that mourn. This is not a lesser concern to him. Yes, he's holding galaxies. He's watching planets to make sure they don't crash into each other. Yes, he's sustaining all life in this universe, but those things are not more important to him than this work of comfort. He delayed some part of the plan of salvation that he might bring comfort to Mary. And I believe equally he is of the utmost concern that you find comfort in this horrible, terrible time. And for you, my dear sister, my dear friend, I want you to know that Jody and I were praying for you. We're praying that you will experience this comfort. And also I want to direct this message to others who may be mourning at this time, mourning the loss of someone close to you. Maybe recently or maybe in years past, you're remembering the anniversary of these losses. Know that Jesus is the God of all comfort, and being moved with compassion, he is doing all that he can to bring comfort to you in this time. And I hope again that this Easter story will speak to your heart of the power and the love and of the comfort of our Savior.